Taxpayer Talks is brought to you by Texans for Fiscal Responsibility and is made possible by generous donations from listeners like you. If you want to support our work, you can visit texastaxpayers.com/donate to make a tax-deductible contribution today. Thank you.
Hey everyone, welcome to Taxpayer Talks. My name is 𝗘𝗪𝗦, president of Texans for Fiscal Responsibility, here with our executive director, Jeremy Kitchen. How you doing?
Doing okay, man. Busy week.
It has been a very busy week. My body is feeling it. I was on the road traveling back and forth to Austin, witnessing on some really important bills this week. And so we have officially begun the busy part of session. And so things are only going to ramp up from here.
Yeah, it certainly feels like it. I mean, it's you'll see this kind of slow growth crescendo, if you will, of bills for sure.
Yeah, so of course, this week I went and testified on a few different bills. The House and the Senate both rolled out their property tax reform packages. And so there's a little bit difference, which of course we're going to talk about today. And I went to go testify for HB 2127 as well. Unfortunately, they called me in the Senate at the exact same time that I was testifying for that. And that's Burrow's bill. Of course, we'll get to that as well. Some very interesting stuff happens this week. I believe we do have some footage, right, Jeremy?
Yeah, I'll set the stage real quick. So, of course, God bless you, man, for going down and testifying as much as you did this week. As you said, so the House and Senate, right, have kind of dueling proposals for quote unquote property tax relief. House Bill 2, we've talked about previously very, very briefly, but House Bill 2 is the, House leadership's approach to providing property tax relief. And ultimately what that does or seeks to do is drop the appraisal cap from 10% to 5%. And then it does provide some additional compression or maintenance and operation school property tax compression, which we do favor there. So we have one of the interesting takeaways from that committee hearing, as you saw, is that there were surprising to me, actually, a lot of individuals and businesses that were opposed to the appraisal cap approach and certainly favored the M&O compression approach, which we do. So let's look at that clip real quick.
The 5% cap provision on all real property raises concerns, and we feel it might be problematic.
However, we respectfully oppose the provisions in HB 2 that impose a 5% appraisal cap on all real property. Over time, those caps create an unequal distribution of taxes.
I think appraisal caps have according to the literature, a negative impact on both equality and uniformity and on the very crucial single valuation methodology.
Limiting taxable value with the use of appraisal caps for all real property will distribute the local property tax burden unfairly amongst property owners.
I'll come up with anything that tells me what the purpose is. What are we trying to encourage with an appraisal cap?
Unfortunately, with appraisal caps, with this bill, once the 15 cents of relief is implemented, tax rates will be higher across an increasingly unequal tax base. There will be tax.
Appraisal cap on all properties seems equal, but unfortunately will not be.
We focus on appraisal caps, and I can tell you unequivocally, they do not work.
So yeah, I was very surprised, honestly. Like usually, when you go to a hearing on a big bill, you kind of expect a love fest, quite honestly. And the very first few testimonies were, right? I would say the first 5 or 6 invited testimonies were a love fest for the bill. But as we got further into the witness testimony, almost unanimously, everyone was rejecting appraisal caps. I was actually very, very surprised by this. Everyone, almost without exception, not only said appraisal caps are bad, inequitable, and they hurt people, but everyone favored what we have been saying for months, which is compression. Compression is the best form of property tax relief. That is why we made it a portion of our package. Of course, ours includes elimination. And when I testified, I made that very clear that we want to see elimination, a path to elimination, and we would, favor removing appraisal caps and adding more compression, as much compression as humanly possible in the House. That's going to help taxpayers the most, for sure.
It'll be interesting for me to see, of course. So they left that bill pending in committee, which was expected. It'll be interesting to see if they make any changes before they vote it out of committee, based on the kind of overwhelming, as you just saw, overwhelming feedback or dislike for appraisal caps. I think, to be clear, we've mentioned this before. I don't think we're inherently opposed to appraisal reform. We just don't necessarily think that that's the best way to provide actual relief to Texas taxpayers. And of course, too, like, being frustrated that we're not being put on a path to the elimination of the tax altogether. I think it is a good segue. Of course, we talked about the Senate, right, also prioritizing its version. The Senate, really, Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick has put almost all his eggs in the basket of a homestead exemption increase. And so he proposed via Senate Bill 3, which is authored by State Senator Paul Bettencourt, a kind of homestead increase from that of the current threshold, which is $40,000, to that of $70,000. And so you went and testified on that. Let's watch that clip real quick.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, I'm Tim Harden, President of Texans for Fiscal Responsibility. I would like to express my gratitude for the opportunity to testify neutrally on Senate Bill 3 as currently written. The current property tax system in Texas infringes upon private property rights of Texans. The perpetual property tax system we have in place ensures Texans will never truly own their homes. Despite the Texas legislature's efforts to lower property tax bills over the last 20 years, they have only succeeded in slowing the growth of property tax bills. This perpetuates an immoral tax system that robs Texans of their right to own property. While I commend the bill's efforts to provide property tax relief by increasing the homestead exemption from $40K to $70K, exemptions only shift the burden to other taxpayers who do not qualify for such an exemption, such as renters and businesses. Any relief found in these efforts has historically been fleeting, and increasing appraisals and inflation have often rendered the relief moot. If the Senate is dead set on homestead exemption increases, why only $70K? Lieutenant Governor Patrick said his goal was to hit $100K in a homestead exemption, so why wait? I urge all to increase the homestead exemption to at least $100,000, if not more. Texans for Fiscal Responsibility strongly favors an approach focused on compression of school district M&O property taxes compared with the lowering of appraisal caps or the increasing of homestead exemption. Senate Bill 3 does not seek to restore Texans' right to own property, but allows state lawmakers to continue treating the symptoms of the problem as opposed to the problem itself. Most fiscal organizations agree the best form of property tax relief is rate compression. It is equitable and lasting. The House's package right now is offering more than double what the Senate is offering in compression, and we believe this is superior to the homestead exemption increase. We urge the Senate to focus their relief efforts on compressing M&O rates. You as lawmakers have a historic opportunity this legislative session to provide not only tangible property tax relief to Texas taxpayers, but also a realistic path to eliminating school M&O property taxes. This can be started by using as much as possible of the projected $32.7 billion surplus to compress school district M&O property tax rates and continue this over time until it's zero. The surplus represents over-collected taxpayer money. In conclusion, I applaud your efforts to provide tax relief by an increase in the homestead exemption, but I encourage you to consider adding more overall to the amount of compression and adding a provision that would put Texas on a path to school district M&O elimination while considering ways to eliminate all property taxes. Thank you for your time.
Do you hate property taxes and want to actually own your home? Please like and subscribe to our channel, turn on notifications so you're aware of future videos on how we can eliminate property taxes in Texas.
Yeah, so I think, of course, very eloquently said, right, is that we're not necessarily opposed to a homestead exemption increase. It's somewhat gimmicky. Not everyone benefits from a homestead exemption. Obviously, if you don't claim a homestead, for one, it kind of shifts the burden to other taxpayers. And as you pointed out, right, and I doubt the committee took it very well, is Dan Patrick, or Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick, had already said he wants to see the homestead exemption go to $100,000. Why wait? Why not do that this go around, right? It kind of shows how gimmicky this sort of thing is, especially historically, since this thing is primarily always, anytime they've increased the exemption, has been eaten up by either inflation or rising appraisals, right? It just really doesn't provide all that much relief. And so to be clear, of course, they left Senate Bill 3, they voted Senate Bill 3 out. We don't necessarily have the votes on that, but everyone has co-authored the bill in the Senate, so the assumption is it was unanimous. It'll be interesting to see how quickly that gets passed off the Senate floor. We didn't talk about it, but they of course do also have it's an overall package, right? So there's, I think, 3 or 4 bills specifically to the kind of property tax relief package being pushed by Dan Patrick. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with that.
Yeah, watching the committee, they started at, I believe, 9 a.m. On Wednesday, and I don't think I testified until about 2 o'clock. So they kind of got to watch a lot of witnesses and invited testimony. And as I said previously in the House, like this was a love fest. I mean, this is typically how these big, priority bills go. It's a big love fest, and maybe there's a few people who come out against or on, right, which is what we do. One of the things I was really kind of taken aback by was the setup of the bill, and quite honestly, like the gaslighting of taxpayers and voters. As Betancourt was laying out his bill, he actually laid out I think both his HJRs and the two bills together. He was touching on some criticism of the bill. He was basically saying, old compression, there's 5.3 in old compression from 2019. He's saying, well, it's not old compression. It's new compression because it's actually compressing the rate down. It's really complicated. And it's just, I was sitting there saying, this guy is absolutely just gaslighting people into thinking that we can't understand that this old compression that was passed in 2019 is new compression. And the reason that they have to pitch it this way is because that's the only way they're going to hit that quote unquote $15 billion historic number. That's the narrative. They want to say at the end of session, we provided historical property tax relief. Unfortunately, even if we're lying about the numbers, which we are, that is not historic because that amount was 14.2 in around 2008. With inflation, we're closer to 20 billion, which is the number we've been saying. So even with the dishonest numbers, we're still not even close to historic. And so it's about a narrative. It's about setting a narrative. Of course, in the testimony, I spoke against the homestead exemption, but I did make the point, that Dan Patrick said $100,000. Why not 100? Why not 200? Right? We have $32.7 billion. He mentioned in his layout that we don't want to, break the constitutional spending limit. Yes, we do. We would love for you to break the constitutional spending limit to give more taxpayer relief. And when I was looking at their signs up there, they have like, this is gonna, the $70,000 homestead exemption is gonna equal $700 a month. Now a year. Now I haven't done the math, but I'm just going to speculate and say that number they're using is not like the difference between the $40,000 and the $70,000. They're probably lumping the whole thing in there, like from 0 to 70,000. That's my guess. I haven't done the math, but based on kind of the dishonesty of the numbers they're throwing out, they're deceiving people into thinking, oh, I'm going to get an additional $700 off my bill, when the reality is, no, it's $700 total, but you're already experiencing $40,000 of that. And so it would be less than half of that. So I would assume it's going to be closer to like 400 or 300. And the fact that people are going to experience a 10% raise in their appraisals, it's going to vanish almost immediately. And we're going to be back in 2 years doing the exact same thing that we have been for the last 20 years, because they refuse to put us on a path towards elimination. They refuse to restore private property rights. This was the whole point of my testimony, begging them not to throw a Band-Aid on the situation. And even if there is some, property tax relief that comes, my guess is it will be minimal, and it is not going to solve the problem of private property rights.
Yeah, I think the best way, as someone who observed this from afar, right, is the peanut gallery. My initial thought from the whole thing, both the House and Senate, but certainly the Senate Finance hearing on this bill, was how disingenuous all of this was, right? It just, to catch this $5.3 billion of old compression as somehow it's new because this is the first time it's going to be felt by taxpayers, right? Which I think is what they were trying to hit home, is absolutely ridiculous, because it speaks nothing to what we've talked about for, several months now on this podcast and in our content, which is all of the previous attempts at this have done nothing but quote unquote slow the growth, right? Treat the symptoms, not the disease of this problem. And what this looks like, both the House and Senate's kind of versions of this, although different, is that we're going to continue to do the same, right? We're not going to change the system. We're not going to put us on a path to eliminate this immoral tax system, which I think is a shame for Texas taxpayers, because as we've talked about several times, it's, as Dan Patrick's mentioned, as the comptroller Glenn Hager's mentioned, it is a historic opportunity, and lawmakers have the opportunity to be courageous, to be bold this session, and seemingly leadership, at least in both chambers, is not prioritizing legislation to do as much. Let's be honest about what this really means, right? Is that they're trying to do the bare minimum, right? So that way they can use all of the other money to do all of the other things, right? The pet projects to spend, right? Republicans in control of the legislature, and they want to spend the surplus money, which is, we talked about, is an over collection of tax money on all of these other pet projects. I think that's a shame if taxpayers allow them to do that, to get away with that this session. There are bills filed, right, that would do everything that we've already talked about on this episode of the podcast, which is put us on a path to elimination, to provide tangible property tax relief. It's a shame that those aren't currently being prioritized by the legislature. I'll pivot real quick. There's an interesting tweet, I think, which is a good segue to the next bill we're going to talk about. So, of course, you briefly mentioned earlier that you went down there originally with the plan to testify in support of House Bill 2127. For those that aren't familiar, this is a bill that's gotten a lot of media attention the last 2 weeks or so, filed by State Representative Dustin Burrows, a Republican out of Lubbock, who also happens to be within House leadership. He's the House Calendars Committee chairman. He filed a bill that seeks to preempt local governments, right, from kind of creating these onerous regulations, a patchwork of regulation that affects things like businesses and what have you. Great bill. It's something that we certainly have needed for a long time, but as we've seen in recent years, you have all of these kind of more progressive cities, just because they can't get wins at the state level, they take their progressive agendas to the local level, and it creates issues for business, but more importantly, small businesses, which ultimately stifles competition, prosperity, everything else. Anyway, so he had this bill come up, lay out. You were, of course, going to testify on it. Weren't able to make that work because of the way the scheduling worked on that day. But one of the things I thought was interesting, before we get your take on it, is he tweeted this tweet right here, and ultimately what it shows is you had this huge kind of groundswell of people that were organized primarily by these leftist organizations, to include evidently Texas Municipal League, right? And he's basically saying they're lying about his bill, which prompted him to suddenly, at least publicly, support a ban on taxpayer-funded lobbying, which we'll get to in a minute. That was also heard this week. What are your thoughts on this bill?
So we like the bill. It is good for business. It basically preempts a lot of ordinances that, as we know, through the pandemic and everything we've experienced over the last couple of years, has just caused problems. Cities, these big liberal cities, have caused problems. And when I got into the hearing, it was packed. There was a ton of people there, and I saw a lot of blue hairs in there. Right, I watched a few UT students come in, and they had anti-capitalist shirts on, and there was one that had a "Don't touch Texas trans" or "Don't mess with trans kids." All this. I'm like, okay, we got a lot of progressives in here who are going to oppose this. We were going to suggest that he actually add election code to that, because although it's kind of geared towards business, it's really a preemption of municipal ordinances. And so we did submit that through writings, because I was unable to testify. I was literally testifying in the Senate at the same time they called me over in the House. But we like the bill. We support the bill. We expect it will be passed into law. I was not able to see TML's testimony, which is what I assume Burrows was reacting to. But we have seen TML's testimony in many other bills. And of course, you and I, being in the legislature for nearly a decade each, we have seen lots and lots of this taxpayer-funded lobby groups and the way that they distort the truth and things like that. And so one part of me is hey, that's great that Dustin Burrows is like, oh, hey, they're lying. Let's ban taxpayer-funded lobbying. The other part of me is like, why do we have to react to somebody, lying on our bill to do what the, grassroots have been begging for years and years and years? We'll take the win if they're going to pass it, but it's like, why not just stand on principle and concede that using taxpayer dollars has always been immoral, whether or not someone made you mad on your bill layout or not. And so we support it. We're going to support him pushing, 𝗏𝗧𝗪𝗏 bill in the House. is the one who the only one I know of that's filed, at least. And of course, or maybe they bring May's bills over from the Senate. We will see. But the fact that the calendar's chair is now saying we need to end or ban taxpayer-funded lobbying, that's a really good thing. It's a really good thing for conservatives who want to see this practice end. And so ultimately, I'm encouraged by it.
Yeah, so, we briefly mentioned this. It is a legislative priority of ours to ban taxpayer-funded lobbying. That bill has been filed several times before by then State Representative Mays Middleton. He's in the Senate now. That got a hearing at Senate Bill 175 on Monday this week in the Senate State Affairs Committee. There was some interesting feedback there. It's expected, as the bill has previously multiple times, it's expected to pass out of committee, no issues, pass out of the Senate with likely no issues. The question always remains, what's the House? And so seeing Representative Burrows come out in favor of it makes things a little bit interesting. I'll throw some, before we get to the clips here, I'll throw some kind of damp water on that and say, historically, the taxpayer-funded lobbying ban bill has gone through the House State Affairs Committee. That committee is currently chaired by State Representative 𝗧𝗘𝗪𝗏, a Republican out of Corpus Christi, who voted against taxpayer-funded lobbying ban in 2019. Now, the other thing to note here is that House Speaker 𝗙𝗜𝗏 was a joint author on the ban on taxpayer-funded lobbying back in 2019 as well. So, who knows what will happen. But kind of going along the same theme of like these kind of associations and organizations, the Texas Municipal League, some of the other ones, Texas Association of Counties, TASB, Texas Association of School Boards. There was, we're going to show these clips real quick. There was the Galveston County Treasurer testified in front of the Senate State Affairs Committee. And, outside of talking about him eliminating his own position for elected office, he mentioned just how terrible and quote, what he said was nefarious activity on behalf of Texas Association of Counties and Texas Municipal League here. So let's see that clip real quick.
I am in favor of SB 175, the ban of the cancer that is taxpayer-funded lobbying. And I also want to alert you to nefarious activity that is going on in the state of Texas by said taxpayer-funded lobbyist. I have a long history in local government. I started my service on city council in League City before being elected to a countywide office in Galveston County. I have long been a fan of the services provided by local government associations such as TML and TAC for their risk pool management, for the legislation tracking that they provide, but the lobbying that they do is horrendous and is non-representative of the voters here in Galveston County or across the state of Texas. These organizations have co-opted the clout, the status, the office of local elected officials to use for their own special interests and purposes. These lobbyists misrepresent their members and misrepresent themselves as a pseudo-government organization with representative authority. So how are they not representative? First off, they're not elected by voters. They might be made up of elected officials who are elected, but these organizations are not elected by voters to represent them in matters of legislation. These folks do not post agendas or have open dialogue about legislative priorities. The decisions that are made by these organizations are made at the top by staff, by consultants, by lobbyists, and then spoon-fed down to elected officials to kind of carry out their message. I ran very openly and transparently in Galveston County to eliminate my office, the office of County Treasurer. I defeated a 20-year incumbent and a third challenger without having to go to a runoff election. The citizens of Galveston County overwhelmingly support what we were trying to do while eliminating the treasurer's position and becoming the 10th county in Texas to do so. TAC has intervened and gone office to office and told different legislators and staff misrepresent themselves by saying that Galveston County is against the item, that the county treasurer is against the item. I am the county treasurer. I am for SJR 28. I am for eliminating the office of Galveston County Treasurer. For them to be a pseudo-government organization that pretends to represent elected officials across the state and to go and misrepresent the facts to the legislature, I think it's horrendous. It needs to be stopped. There's a number of instances that they've misrepresented themselves. In the 87th session, they told the County Affairs Committee members on the House side that the County Commissioners Court were not in support of the item. The County Commissioners Court voted unanimously and bipartisanly in support of the item. But the committee members were told that the Commissioners Court did not support it. Here in the 88th session, I've met with over 100 legislative offices, and I've found the same thing to be true. These paid taxpayer-funded lobbyists are going into offices and telling them that the current treasurer and the Commissioners Court are against our local bill, which could not be further from the truth. We have, once again, unanimous support from the Commissioners Court, and we have support of myself, the elected treasurer, and 12 of 13 cities within the county have passed resolutions in support of our local bill. Not only are they not representative on their face, but they're also misrepresenting the facts to the legislature. And I think this bill, SB 175, is a big step in the right direction to protect taxpayers from being misrepresented here at the legislature. One last thing to note, in my race, there was some electioneering taking place by Texas Association of Counties against me and in support of my opponent. They are well-funded and well-connected. They use their influence to do what it is that they want to do and not what taxpayers or citizens in Texas want their elected officials to do. So as a local elected official, I think we need to keep the good from these associations and do away with the bad, which is the lobbying activities. I'm available for any questions, and thank you for your time and for your service to the great state of Texas.
Yeah, so of course, he's over here talking about potential nefarious activity, which was interesting. I think what this really speaks to is that compared to, as we've seen this bill, as we mentioned, multiple times come through the legislature, compared to previous sessions, there does seem to be more and more of an appetite by lawmakers and other organizations to they're kind of done putting up with groups like TML and TAC and how they approach some of these issues. And so I thought that was interesting to kind of speak to that. Here's another clip of Scott Bowen, who's a Clear Creek ISD trustee at large, I believe, down there, basically saying he's for a ban on taxpayer-funded lobbying because he doesn't like TASB, or the Texas Association of School Boards. So let's hear him talk about that real quick.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Scott Bowen. I'm a trustee for Clear Creek ISD at large. We're a district of 40,000 students in the Southeast Houston area. I'm here on my own time and on my own dime to support Senate Bill 175, and I'm opposed to taxpayer-funded lobbying. My school board, like all the others, is part of TASB, and TASB seems to spend 140 days every 2 years advocating for everything my constituents hate. They're opposed to educational freedom, which is a priority of this Senate. They're trying to roll back accountability and A to F grading, and they say on their website that their cornerstone principle is the promotion of equity and the intentional eradication of systemic racism. That's what they're here for. They also lobby against charter schools, despite the fact that charter schools are also part of TASB. So right now, our taxpayers are stuck spending about $19,000 a year with them because they also provide services that we can't easily unwind. Insurance, legal services, those are hard to replace, but the lobbying is completely extraneous to all of it and is not necessary at all. And by the way, I was elected to represent my region in the grassroots agenda development process, never got a call back. So TASB does not speak for school boards, trustees, or taxpayers. It is an activist group that is attached to an insurance company that we have to use as school districts. And what they are advocating for has not been run by any of us. And then as the session goes on, they even misinform us about what you're doing and try and turn local school boards against their elected officials. So I think this conduct is unacceptable, And I really urge you to pass this legislation and put an end to it. And I'd be happy to answer any questions.
So yeah, I'm really encouraged by the fact that, we have a lot of now local government officials who are opposing taxpayer-funded lobbying. Traditionally, as well as I do, when we go speak, anytime we get pushback on taxpayer-funded lobbying, it is typically from local officials and more typically from rural local officials, right? Because they will make the argument that, oh, we can't compete with the big cities and without a taxpayer-funded lobby. But the reality is, yes, you can. One, the private sector exists. You are free to come up and bind all of your rural counties together and have someone go down there. You don't actually have to pay them, right? You could go down yourself, right? Which is exactly what you're elected to do. And so they're just outside of a normal paradigm. They've been operating in this corrupt system for so long that by making it actually equal, by saying no one can hire corporate lobbyists, it would actually force them to do their job. Now, the testimony that we got, there's no criticism towards these two guys. I think they understand that. I'm amazed at the testimony of the treasurer down there, that his goal was to eliminate his own position. What a hero. Run for governor, dude. We love you. That's awesome. So I was really encouraged by the testimony and the fact that, this idea that this corrupt system needs to end. We seem to be getting closer and closer to making this reality.
Yeah, I mean, it's been a long time coming. So I don't want to count our chickens before they've hatched, but it was encouraging this week to see a lot of this feedback, to see a lot of people in key leadership positions certainly at least be open to the idea this go around, which is different than previous legislative sessions. So we'll see. As we mentioned, of course, we've talked about both the elimination of property tax and banning taxpayer-funded lobbying. Both of those are key tenets of kind of our legislative priorities this legislative session. So, we're only right at the halfway mark for the ongoing session, which is a good segue, I guess, to remind folks, we sent out yet another vote notice this week. If you are not, so our premier product as an organization is the Fiscal Responsibility Index. We've been doing it since 2007. And the way that works is we let both the public and lawmakers know ahead of time votes that might be considered as a part of that index at the end of the legislative session. We sent out a vote notice for Senate Bill 30 this week in the Senate. That is the supplemental appropriations bill. You can check that out, of course, on our website. But if you don't get vote notices and you want to be informed on bills that impact your wallet as they move through the legislative process, make sure to go to our website, texastaxpayers.com/subscribe. You can subscribe not only to vote notices, but if you want our weekly email, the fiscal note, and other things there. We're going to start to send more and more of those out as stuff moves through the legislative session this go around.
Yeah, so as you said, we're getting into the thick of it. I know that we've had some other priority bills like the elimination bill. I know Shaheen's bill was referred, right? And so here in the next few weeks, we're probably going to have hearings on those. I plan on attending anything that's a priority of ours as long as I'm able. And so we should, the wheels of session are now fully turning. And so it's only going to get busier from here. We look forward to seeing you all again next week. Of course, we'll have an update on all the goings on of session and what has happened. We appreciate y'all being with us this week. Y'all have a great one.
Hey everyone, thanks for listening. For even more content, head over to our website, texastaxpayers.com, where you can find all of our written content, the Fiscal Responsibility Index, and a whole host of resources that can help you navigate the already ongoing 88th legislative session. Make sure while you're there to subscribe to the Fiscal Note and vote notices to stay informed about issues that affect your wallet. Thanks. Hey, you made it to the end of this video. Thanks for watching. We really appreciate it. Make sure you subscribe and hit the bell icon so that way you're notified next time we post a video and update to the channel. Thanks again.